So, as you can see from the screen, we've got a presentation. It's by Kaveh Bazargan, who is Director of River Valley Technologies, and it's about micropublishing. This is quite different from publishing as it existed in the 1990s, when I first met Kaveh at a meeting that I co-organised with Malcolm Clark, who is another one of the participants today. Without anything more, I'll hand over to Kaveh and look forward to his presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for suggesting I give this talk that should take about 10 minutes. And it's not really tech related, but actually we've all been in research, so hopefully I'd love to hear your responses to it. So the question is there a better way to communicate research? And I've chosen my words carefully there. Publishing, if I say whether to publish research, that's in your mind, you think about journals, etc. So the basic idea of the current journals, if you like, is to communicate research from one person to another. So, you know about me. So at River Valley, our vision is to accelerate the communication of research. And that really sums up what I'm trying to do. It's exactly, the more I think about it, we chose the right words for the vision. We've been about 30 years in the scholarly publishing industry. And since 1988, we've been typesetting STM content, science, technical, medical content. But of course, now we're doing more, it's technology than hands down on the keyboard. So about 10, 11 years ago, we started creating platforms for publishing. Peer review system, we have a production management system, we have a hosting platform, data visualization platform, etc. So we're thinking, what more can we do with our platforms? How can we make things better? And I've always thought, going back to my early days, how can we just make more, if you like, communicating research more fun and more interesting and more efficient. So I'll give you just enough information. It's not about me. It's just enough information so that I can make my case. So I studied physics in Imperial College London. And of course, Malcolm, I have to mention that Malcolm was at Imperial College London. He was doing at the computer center, and he was the one person who knew about tech before LaTeX came along. And this is around 1983. So I started using tech. Someone mentioned tech, and I grabbed the book and I started using this. Sorry, this is a slight segue, but now Malcolm here, I have to say it. And he was the one person who can support me, and I was the single user. So there was me at Imperial College and Malcolm. And thanks to Malcolm, I managed to write my thesis somehow using tech by using a lot of cheats. Years later, I said to Malcolm, thank you very much, Malcolm. If it wasn't for you, I couldn't have written my PhD. He said, no, I should thank you. I said, why the heck should you thank me? He said, because it's because of you that I had a secure job there, because I could say there is someone who needs support for tech. So you correct me if I'm wrong. So my PhD was in holography, display holography, making 3D images, which was great fun. And the idea was to improve the realism of 3D holograms, which was all the rage then. So I want to tell you the story of my very first research publication. This is a picture of a hologram. As we're on here, I managed to find the hologram, and you probably can't see it, but anyway, I'll show you later. This is it. So you can see just about the 3D. It's got to be illuminated properly. So basically, it's a hologram, a display hologram is the best form of most realistic 3D imaging technique. So you can see all the nuances, all the reflections, etc. So if you look at the hologram, a white light illuminated hologram, you'll see that the parts of the hologram that are of the 3D image that go through the plane of the glass that you're looking at, they're pretty sharp. But as you move away from as you move away, forwards, in front or behind the glass plate, they get more and more blurred. And we all knew that. It's a theory, and in practice, we could see it. So I was making this is called an image plane hologram. That means it's sort of straddling your glass plate. You make a primary sort of master hologram on the left, and you project it to what's called the secondary hologram, the image plane hologram. And these rays should be parallel when you're projecting. So you need to have a big lens or a big mirror to have parallel lines or collimated light to get your image. Now, I didn't have a big mirror or big lens at the time. I thought, oh, I'll get away with just diverging light. So I used diverging light, so not quite parallel. So what I was expecting was a hologram where this image was half behind, half in front. What I found was that actually the image was about a couple of inches behind. This wasn't right. This wasn't in the books. It wasn't supposed to do that. And I knew I had something, but I didn't quite work out. I couldn't work out why. I was an experimentalist, not a theoretician. So I was scratching my head. And there was a guy called Mike Forshaw down the corridor. He was much cleverer than I was. He was a theoretician. He was older. And I thought, I'll go and ask him. I showed this to Mike, and he said, hey, I said, look, I found something interesting. What do you think, Mike? And I'm just going back through the story. He said, never seen that before. I think it's due to the fact you didn't use parallel laser beam. I said, you're right. I was too lazy to go and make it parallel. And he said, well, listen, you can get a paper out of this. This is how it works in academia. So, well, paper, goodness me, I haven't even got my PhD yet. What do I do? He said, well, what you need to do is you need some numbers, you need to do some more experiment, you need some references, you need draw some diagrams, then we can get a paper. So then we can write the paper. I said, okay. I went back, I did some measurements. Instead of just an object that I put a grid. I measured things so that we could see that it does tally with the theory. So, and we drew some diagrams. So, for example, this image here, instead of you don't have these parallel lines, you use diverging this side, diverging again, without going into details. The image sort of moves to the wrong place, and that explained why it was. We found some references together. Put the photo. This is the image of Don Quixote that I'd made. It was a statue of Don Quixote. So basically, after going through all this, we sent it to a journal called Optics Letters. A few months after we actually discovered, I come across this. This is the paper. We got a 3-page paper out of it. And that's how all research communication works. So if we look at the title, Mike came out with this really nice sort of punchy title: an image plane hologram with non-image plane motion parallax. So as you move around, it doesn't seem to be in the image plane. That was his idea. Great. Bazargan and Forshaw. Note that nothing in here says who did what. Who was this theory first, then someone did the experiment? Or did you come across this by accident? And who did what? No one knows apart from you guys and some other places I've given this presentation to. And it just says, it is shown that in certain circumstances, it's possible to generate nearly achromatic images which appear to lie completely behind the second hologram plane. Which is true, but it doesn't have a lot of information. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we knew who did what? Because Mike should get the credit for the theory. I should get the credit for, thinking there's something, recognizing there's something there. What came first? So wouldn't it be nice if I discovered something and I could just immediately publish that discovery somewhere, saying, guys, look what I found. You would have saved 6 or 7 months. And then More data was available there. For example, what wavelength to use, what chemistry, what reconstruction line, none of that is there. It wasn't relevant. I could still get the paper. And what if more people could contribute to it than just me and Mike? Yeah. So at the time, of course, there was just print paper and nothing else. But now let's think about how we use Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow to ask questions about software. So I use now and again, I use it for tech, for example. You guys, you will know much more about this, but so here's a question on tech Stack Exchange. Someone's asked the question, and you can see that 4 hours, someone called Lucas 4 hours ago asked the question. Again, 4 hours ago, so Ebo came along and edited the text. Just because they wanted to edit it and maybe get some brownie points for it. And they actually get upvotes for editing. A little contribution, but it made even the question more easier to understand. And this is the edit. There's track changes of what happened. Everything is there. So, and then a while later, 17 minutes ago, like 3 hours later, that's all. Greg, this is everyone knows who this guy is. He is Italian guy. He's legend. He's got, look, 518,000 upvotes, or I forget how they basically brownie points on Stack Exchange, and he gave the answer, and of course a lot of upvotes. Okay, so why do people do this? Why do programmers go and copy edit someone else's text? It's because they want to be recognized by their peers, that I've done this, I answered this. When I can, I answer, but it's very rarely. Researcher is exactly like that. We want to be recognized, or when I was a researcher, they want to be recognized by their peers. So right now, the only way researchers are recognized, the only brownie points they get is by number of publications and where they published, right? It's a very, very rough measure. So interesting things about Stack Exchange. You can be pseudonymous, not anonymous, but pseudonymous. So Greg doesn't have to say who he or she is or what race they are, etc. But it's that person you've seen there before. And the system is it's very difficult to cheat the system. There's a strict code of conduct, and you might comment on this. It's moderated by the community, but it really works, right? If you misbehave there, someone will call you out and you might be banned, for example. Every contribution can be voted up or down. I mean, I've asked questions there and I got a downvote because I forgot to say what program I was using. Is it Python or R? So, and it's hard to game. It really does work, I believe. And if you want to find something, invariably in programming, Stack Exchange tells you where the answer is. So let's imagine now we have something loosely based on Stack Exchange. This is a hypothetical, it's not a real site, but My Research IO. Loosely based on Stack Exchange. So I go there and I say, hey guys, look what I've found. I've got some result here. And I say how I did it, give a little bit of detail. Someone might say, oh, that's interesting. They give me a point for what? For experimental technique specifically. Someone comes along and says, hey, what wavelength did you use? I say, yeah, here's the wavelength. So you've got the laser wavelengths. Anything I might have missed, they'll ask me. Someone else comes and says, listen, there's three publications here that are related. They might get a tick for bibliography. So everyone comes in with their contributions. And they get voted up and down according to whether they were worthwhile or not. So there's another 2 posts, for example. Good insight. Mike Forshaw comes along. Now he might be he might be my friend. I may not know him, but this allows someone in another country to come in and says, this is interesting. Can you do this test for me? I carry out the test. I get data gathering points. Mike Forshaw says, listen, I know exactly what's happening. And he gives a theory. Mike Forshaw gets a lot of brownie points for analysis. So already you know who has done what, who is good at what. Someone does a sort of 3D visualization. And they say, yeah, good for data visualization. So each person is gathering points for what they're good at, etc. So, sorry, this should be my research IO. So basically, I build a profile that I've got. I'm good at experimental technique. You can see immediately what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. I might be good at explaining things only. Yeah. Now, suppose that a university is looking for someone who is a good in the lab in holography, okay, good at analysis and teaching, etc. I apply my CV, but I give a link to my profile on my research IO, so they can see immediately my background, what I've done, what I'm good at. Yeah. So this could become a site for evaluating people. Okay, instead of how many publications, which journal. So the advantages for research, there is no delay at the moment on it. It's something like a year from the time I find out something until the world knows about it. That is not good. There is I don't know if you're aware, there's a big problem with plagiarization. In figures, for example, in text, in research papers. There are actually companies mostly in a lot in China. They're called paper mills. You can actually pay them. They'll write a paper for you, put your name on it, and you pay them $1,000 or $2,000. Yeah, because you want to get more. Their paper mills are around. And a lot of the time they'll get figures from different places. They've got lots of figures. They put them together. Peer reviewer looks at it, says, yeah, that looks good. They publish it. There's a lady called, if you want to, Elizabeth Bick, B-I-K, Elizabeth Bick. She's Dutch, and I'm in touch with her. She has found something like 6,000 research papers with plagiarized figures in them. So it's a big problem in publishing now. In this, what I'm suggesting, it's very difficult to do that because as soon as you put up a figure, someone might say, hey, I've seen this before. Yeah, not the 3 peer reviewers, for example. So there are no retractions. It's not as if right now, a lot of when there is a bad paper, the poor publisher has to retract it. And that's a big hassle. All the relevant data are available. Whoever wants to say, give us the data. Information is always up to date. Anyone can go at any time and update that. Okay, so that's the advantage there. For researchers, researchers can get granular attribution for what they've done, so that everyone knows what they're good at. They can be pseudonymous. Supposing I'm from some minority, supposing I'm a woman, and women, there is, sort of sexism in science. There's a lot of research about that. Here, no one knows who you are, all right? But they know that this person has given these contributions. Negative. Yeah. There's a problem with negative results. You need to mute. Somebody needs to mute. So. Okay. Yeah. So, negative results. At the moment, you cannot. It's difficult to publish negative results, especially with famous journals. If you say, I did this and I didn't get the right result, for example, in pharma, you find that they're not published. So another lab does the same experiment and it's a waste of time. So here, negative results can be in a granular way. You can say, someone might say, hey, Kaveh, you forgot to do this. There's nothing in this. And it's forgotten. It's done. And I haven't wasted time trying to write a paper. Users do what they like best. I didn't like to write a paper, but I had to write it. There are courses for researchers to how to write, how to write an abstract, etc. Why don't we leave the guys to do what they're good at. If they like to write a narrative, they write. If they don't, they don't. They just post the results. And of course, everything's free for all, right? So the question is, are we done? Is that finished? The answer is no, because this site is only good, just like a Stack Exchange. It's only good for people who really specialize in that. No one else wants to go and see who did what, etc. But I, as a researcher, I'll know what's going on there. Yeah. So non-specialists is hard to navigate. We still need the narrative. We need the story, right? That story is still needed for general people, for people who are not really specialized in that. So for the scientists, we can have a technical journal, if you like, that's written. Someone can write this up. For the layman, we can have a magazine. And readers now will pay for good content, just like you pay for a good magazine, or Scientific American is not free. You buy it, but you know it's good writing. So my vision is that the primary research record is what is in this hypothetical site that I've said, right? So everything is there, and you can always go back. You know what the history was, just like Stack Exchange. However, at any time, a publisher can come along and say, this looks interesting, we will write about this. Then a journalist, a science journalist, can write whatever they want, but point to the primary research record. Another publisher might write it in another way for another kind of audience. All of them, these guys can make money. They can be expensive publications. And any number of publishers can do that. So that is it. That's my vision of scientific communication. And I'm happy to get any thoughts from you, because you guys are cleverer than what I am. Thank you.
Kaveh, could I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I sit in the mathematics department, which of course is different than experimental science. And most of what my colleagues do is intelligible only to a tiny number of people around the world in their narrow field of research. And somehow I think this kind of website just wouldn't work for mathematics kind of research. I certainly can see how it could be useful in experimental sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, engineering, medicine, and so on. But at least in the environment I sit in, I can't see people using this. We have instances in mathematics of famous discoveries that are published in papers that nobody understands. And then they go to referees, and sometimes the referees throw up their hands and say, we don't understand this. Andrew Wild's paper on the proof of the Fermat conjecture that there are, if you take x to the n plus y to the n plus z to the n, there are no solutions for n bigger than 3 for integers. And this took a long time and a tremendous amount of work by extremely competent mathematicians to finally come to an agreement. The second example was what's called the Kepler conjecture of what is the optimal way to stack solids, such as oranges or cannonballs in a pile. Now, cannoneers discovered years ago, you lay down a square of them, and then you put a smaller square on top, and you end up with a pyramid. But it was not known whether that was truly the optimal. And this was proved a number of years ago by a Utah mathematician. But people called it into question because they didn't really believe the proof. And so he spent several years developing computer software to do an independent proof and arrive at the result he'd obtained originally. So these are really, really complicated things, and I don't think are really amenable to kind of a social media site for research results. I'm not putting your ideas down. I think
no. I understand. Yeah.
For some of us, I don't think it fits. But that's all I'll say.
Well, I mean, I'm not a mathematician, so I did just enough mathematics to do my physics degree. But I'm just wondering, even in that extremely mathematical, specialized mathematical area, why can't someone put up that unintelligible or very difficult hypothesis or something, and you have the 10 people who might understand it come back and say you missed this or you missed that? Why can't you have that? Or that's the bit I don't understand.
Yeah, perhaps one could, but I think, see, in your case, a discovery of some unusual result in holography that any human could look at and say, oh, that's not what we expected, or at least you can show them what was expected and what you found that they're not the same. And the question is why. But for a difficult mathematics paper, I just don't think there are that many sets of eyes that can look at it. And would they all be on this site?
Right. Okay. No, I take your point. Yeah.
And I mean, just to give kind of an example, the American Chemical Society and the American Physical Society have magazine publications that describe current research in those fields. And my feeling for a long time has been that the only thing that the American Mathematical Society publishes that can be intelligible outside the mathematics community is the notices of the AMS, which does have articles that attempt to describe without much mathematics what people are doing. But I think it's a very challenging problem in mathematics.
Okay. Yeah, I take your point. It's not my area. Thank you. Jonathan.
Okay, I'm going to start with an example of mathematical communication that was very important to me. So I was working at a small math department, and every so often math journals appeared on the entrance area of the department before they went into the library, and I picked up a copy of Inventiones Mathematica, which is a high-ranking journal published by Springer Verlag, and found a paper by Baer and Bilera. And when I it didn't take me long to reading that paper to realize that I was uniquely well placed to solve a problem that arose from the intersection of my work and their work. And if you like, that's the good news. The bad news is I still haven't solved that problem. My career would have been a lot better if it had. So in 1985, we had, it's in Massachusetts, we had a fairly nice relationship with DEC. And so we had a computer center with VAX, and we had a Digital Rainbow sort of microcomputers. And we could communicate from the math department to the computing center through a modem. And it was an acoustic modem. We actually put the damn thing into a phone coupler. So that was the relative sophistication of print and digital communication. And things have enormously changed since then. I'm going to sort of say some things in response to Nelson, but before that, a few words about Stack Exchange. The two people behind it, Joel Swansky and Jeff Atwood, are both quite interesting. And Joel Swansky has developed something called Trello, which is sort of project management organized on a Kanban sort of style. And Jeff Atwood is one of the people behind Discourse, which you might have seen. And Discourse is quite interesting, and it works well. I didn't realize it was from the same stable as Stack Overflow. And this is something that really struck me quite strongly, which is that Python has a lot of mailing lists, just like our tech community has a lot of mailing lists. And they all use the Mailman software. though the Python community uses the latest versions. Well, lately, they've switched and they're now using Discourse, which is an entirely different plan of things. And it seems to be very much for the better. I also interested in Elm, the web development, the JavaScript development environment for web pages, and they use Discourse for a lot of their stuff. And I'm impressed by the way in which you have the community building, you have the upvoting, you have automatic closing of topics after discontinuation, and a whole bunch of other things that, if you like, are largely based around a user experience. And so much software is written on the basis of what does the developer want to do? And I feel is insufficiently informed by user experience. Now, something surprised me. I can't remember how I stumbled across it, but on one of the Stack Exchange sites for theoretical computer science, somebody asked a question about Peter Shor's quantum factorization algorithm. And something that caused a bit of a stir happened, which is that Peter Shor replied to this question. And I just looked him up, and he's a member of Theoretical Computer Science Stack Exchange. And he's got a reputation of 23,000, and he's asked 7 questions and given 175 answers. So that's one example. Another site is the online encyclopedia of integer sequences, which is mathematically focused, although I think a certain amount of it is to do with physics, theoretical physics. And any sequence of numbers, like the Fibonacci numbers, appear in there. The Catalan numbers, not many people other than mathematicians know about them, but they're somewhat ubiquitous. And relations between numbers can be a foreshadow of further work. And Richard Borchard's got a Fields Medal for proving conjecture of something that's called monstrous moonshine, which says that these numbers connected with the representation of this group, which is called the monster, are related to the coefficients in the J function in modular forms. And it was just big numbers happening to agree with each other. And he proved that they agreed all the way and gave some theoretical explanation as to what was going on. So the correlation of that sort of stuff is very, very useful, very important. I came up with a series of numbers, and through the online encyclopedia of integer sequences, it mentioned Jensen polynomials, and I looked up Jensen polynomials again in that encyclopedia and found interesting work by a chap called Don Zagier, who's a big wheel in certain parts of mathematics. So the sort of thing that you're thinking about in micropublishing is already happening in some ways. And in mathematics, this sort of collaboration is taking place. There's 2 more things here. The one is Polymath, which is a project set up by Terry Tao and others to find interesting problems where people could collaborate on a sort of a fairly equal basis, just sort of chipping away at a problem. Some problems are suitable for this sort of thing and some aren't. And it represented a new way of working, much closer to the collaborative open source software way of working. And it's had some successes, particularly in things where you need lots of different points of view and different skills. The second thing is that Peter Scholze has some conjectures that correspond to, I think he calls it liquid tensors. which are pretty fundamental, that would allow a great simplification of branches of several areas and problems in mathematics, but they depend on results that have to be solid. They have to be verified. And he was very, very concerned that even though he thought he'd proved them, or he thought they were true and he'd written down a proof, he didn't have that solidity. And a number of people worked together to produce a real proof, which is a computer verified proof. And again, that was collaborative. And Kevin Buzzard at Imperial, I believe, one of the people in that project, described it as a bit like an architect and a team of programmers. An architect who said, this is how you build the software. And the programmers say, well, what do you do in this situation? What do you do in that situation? So a lot of stuff is going on. And the whole nature of publishing is changing. This brings to mind what is supposed to have been, I think, the thing that made Twitter a thing, the thing that made Twitter really important, which was the miracle on the Hudson. A plane took off, had a double bird strike that knocked out both the engines, and Charles Sullenberger landed the plane on the Hudson River, and nobody was badly hurt and nobody died. Well, that's extraordinary, and the photographs of it, sure. But somebody had a digital camera, they took a photograph of that, they tweeted it on Twitter, and within, I don't know, half an hour, it was everywhere. And that was the thing that, or one of the things that really made Twitter a platform.
Okay, I didn't know about that. I remember the incident, but I didn't know the Twitter connection. Okay, but that just shows what you can do. You don't need a reporter to go and report it and write it. Yeah.
Well, it changes the nature of reporting, because it's no longer being done by paper and so forth. The preprint archive, the archive makes an enormous difference to the distribution of material. It used to be that you'd write to somebody and say, can you send me a copy of such and such an article? Or you print off copies at the Math Institute and send them out to places. So we used to have preprints arrive when I was at Warwick from Aarhus. They just send us the stuff so that we were a part of the loop. And given that it takes a ship about 7 to 10 days to cross the Atlantic, the communication of important information on print is somewhat delayed. It's also different. So I'm going to wind up at this point by saying not this, that, or the other, but as a community, the tech community, I think, has become very, very good at something that is less important, which is the typesetting for print. And the whole question of the social communication of information rather than the technical communication is somewhere where we're quite weak. Now, Aldous Manutius, before he developed PageMaker, whatever it's called, was a Venetian printer, and he invented both italic type and the paperback book, or at least that sort of goes in your pocket format. And he also, in some sense, invented the critical edition and various other things. Now, Joel Sponsky and Jeff Atwood have invented Stack Exchange and Discourse, which is well set to be replacing mailing lists in many settings. So mailing lists are sort of email, it's a sort of, the name gives you the genesis, gives the genesis away. And the difference between email is that you may have an email list server which publishes your emails, but essentially you're sending it to somebody, and one of those somebody's is a device that publishes email on a web page. Whereas the discourse sites that are used by Python and Elm and quite a few other people I think Gnome is also moving to discourse. I've got an entirely different model of things. You can change things after you've written them, but that is visible. You can upvote, you can downvote. It's got lots of usability features. Now, being connected with what the technology is doing and knowing the area we're in is really important. So my approach to your talk, Kaveh, is a bit different, and it's in part because, if you like, I'm a theoretician rather than a practical person who knows how to earn a living. It is that rather than trying to sell something, I'm interested in understanding better what's going on out there and see the you see opportunities. I'm sort of wanting to know the social changes that are underlying those opportunities, if you like. So the growth of mobile phones, changes in digital literacy, the way people behave, the growth of personal computers, all sorts of things like that. There's a great big social change taking place, I think. It's a sort of second industrial revolution or something. So that's just another way of looking at it. I've probably rattled on, and I'll mute myself now.
I'm amazed by your memory of all the names and all the people who did different things.
Now, this is one of the things, is because I'm not in a seminar, I can open another window.
Oh, you shouldn't have said that, Jonathan. We were all so impressed, but still, we didn't know. And you did that.
Twitter's changed what happened in press conferences, because somebody's giving a press conference and talking a bunch of nonsense, or somebody can tweet, I'm at this press conference, and so. Well, it's not true. And then all the reporters know it. So that was one of the sort of things that happened with Twitter. The Lutheran Revolution, the Reformation, wasn't just Martin Luther banging, nailing to the door his theses on the Catholic Church. They were printed in large numbers. And
so I think you're right. So a big part of this is the digital connection, being able to collaborate, and we know how that's done, how that's changed the world. For me, the main thing for me was splitting, deconstructing if you like, the story or the narrative, which is still the way things are reported, right? We know what a paper is. It's got a wide column at the top with the abstract, and you've got two columns, you've got a few figures, you've got some references. All that takes time. So what I want to do is to have, lots of granular publications so that there's no delay. Just like someone tweeted about the Hudson River immediately. Let's immediately tweet, in a sense, in a generic sense, what we've done. So firstly, everyone knows who did it. I still get the credit for it. And immediately people can say, oh, you did something wrong there. So I've saved time. And I don't have to go and find references. I don't know where they are. I don't want to write prose. I just want to stay in the lab. And people who are good at writing, scientific writers who love it, they become writers. So everyone enjoys what they're doing. So that's the sort of thing. I just see everything fitting together, including this, the connection between people. But so we'll see. And of course, going further, how do we get the narrative? If everything is nicely set up in some sort of structured way in this, whatever system it is, it should be easy then to link to those, right? So I will write my narrative, someone writes a narrative, but with lots of links to these various, the primary research record. Or if it's for the layman to say, well, trust me, this is what happened. So that's the idea. We'll see. But other people, as you know, Jonathan, other people have been thinking along the same lines, and there is a bit of a discussion about this. We've stunned everyone into silence.
No, somebody will say something soon. I'll say something, which is, I think the paper's got its place and the book has got its place, and I'd certainly be reluctant to throw them away. But what is happening, I think, is that new repositories, new stores of value, and new skills are being recognized. So I'm very much on the periphery of this, but in the UK, there's an organization called the Society of Research Software Engineers. And they are organizing themselves, and in some sense I'll use the word campaigning, although that's not quite right, campaigning for proper recognition of the role played by a research software engineer. So that's somebody whose primary responsibility is writing the software, but they have to know the physics or the engineering or the mathematics or whatever else is involved, because the people who are doing the research, the people who are the principal investigators understand their subject, but don't necessarily understand software. And the research software engineer has to have a foot in both camps. And these people are really important, just as in the 19th century, the people that could blow vacuum tubes were really important for the understanding of electromagnetism and electrons and all that sort of stuff. So I don't think it has to be necessarily confrontational, but the recognition of new areas of activity is really important. In software development, the importance of people who deal with the more human factors of things is, I think, now being much better recognized. And the people who can, what's the word? Resource management, for example, is something from piloting, where, aerospace, where the authority of the pilot sometimes inhibits reporting of information that's actually vital for the safety of everybody. And these human factors are now becoming more important, and recognition of the complication of the world, if you like, is something that is becoming part of computer science. I think computer science is becoming a glue that ties together a lot of activities.
Okay.
And certainly the phrase digital humanities is, I think, quite rightly, widely used.
Yeah, it sounds like a sort of a contradiction, but it makes sense. It's a big thing now, digital humanities. You're muted, Christopher. Ah, there we go.
Yeah, I heard digital humanities, which is something that it's an area that I'm interested in, at least in supporting. So. I had to join partway through the talk, so I'm still getting my bearings in what was presented today, I'm afraid.
You didn't miss much. It was just me, Christopher. Yeah, no, it's just basically, yeah, making things, publishing things as soon as little nuggets of publication instead of waiting to write the whole paper. The only way you can publish now is to write a paper, right, with the abstract and references, etc.
We can write a little paper and put it on archive, which is
Well,
and then you keep adding to it
that's
over time.
yeah. But most people, if I want to be recognized in my field, if I'm a scientist, that sort of at the moment the default way is right. This is my CV. These are my papers, and look, I've had one in Nature and one in Science. Yeah, I've made it. So that's the thing. That's your how you count your credit, if you like. And I'm just thinking whether we can do something different so that science moves really fast.
I know the high energy physics folks. They're a tight-knit community, and they don't publish very often. They don't. That's not. They might eventually publish their papers, but their papers are really circulated on archive, and they recognize the value of papers by acclaim. The community will identify the good papers. They're tight enough that they can just talk about it and identify the good papers. They don't really need that formal peer review system to figure out where their field is moving. And I think it's a really interesting model. It works really well because they're small, but it's much faster than going through publisher each time.
It makes sense, and there's a lot of discussion now, in publishing about the value of peer review. If you think about it, the peer reviewers are. I don't know if you've, for example, looked at the big announcement from eLife, where they're separated. They're not the peer reviewer does not decide whether something is accepted or rejected. There's peer review, and unless it's total rubbish, as it were, desk rejected, they still publish it. And here are the reviews. It's created a lot of discussion right now, because if you think about it, I've written something complicated. The publisher, the editor, goes and finds a couple of reviewers who are busy, but they think, oh, I've got to do this. They're not going to catch everything. They're not going to, they're not going to. It's going through a sort of kept funnel, if you like, and they could miss some things with the best will in the world. So there's a lot of discussion of, what really is peer review. And remember, peer review is relatively new. I think it's about, I think it's something like 40 years old, something like that, or 50 years old. Before that, there was no peer review. It's a relatively new idea.
I don't know it's that new to publish something in the Proceedings of the Royal Society. I think you have to go.
Yeah, but that was in 1665. That was the Proceedings of the Royal Society. I think Proceedings is, anyways, it's the first journal, but there was no peer review as such. It was, here you are, this is my paper, and it was published. There was no peer review.
My understanding is that it was the Fellows of the Royal Society who published their stuff there, or the thing that there was. It wasn't an open door policy.
No, but you were a fellow of the Royal Society. Then basically, you're not going to write rubbish. Yeah, here we are. They're not going to get. Who's going to peer review a paper?
Well, the Fellows of the Royal Society had a certain amount of regal power, and whether
but exactly. So I'm just reading here. Peer review is a relatively recent innovation in the history of publication. The first journal, which is still in print, right, 1665 by Royal Society, while peer review as we know it began in the 1970s, actually.
So, just tossing here, in the field of biometrics, I think the journal that was founded by Carl Pearson, the American statistician, and later edited by someone else plus his son, through probably the first 60 or 70 years of the existence of that journal, the review process was the editor himself. There were just 3 men involved in this journal. And what went into the journal was what they approved of, and it didn't go to anyone else. That did mean that they could do relatively rapid publication. In fact, that was one of the reasons why both Science and Nature were founded. Nature in the UK and Science in the US, with the notion that papers would be relatively short, 1 or 2 or 3 pages at most. and could be gotten through an approval process so that within a week or two of submission, receipt rather by the editors, they could be in print, and certainly have served a valuable purpose. I have a book on my shelf which I could dig if I took a few minutes, about the history of the journal Nature, which is quite an interesting read. And it was founded precisely because of this problem of long delay of publication, where it took months, years for stuff to appear in print, and they really solved that problem and got the period down to less than a month.
Yeah, it's still there's the race to publish. There's pressure on everyone, the pressure on peer reviewers, pressure on, people like us who do the, composition, if you like. It's a matter of days that we have to return things, and on peer reviewers as well, and on the publisher, because they want to say we publish within this time. So again, that also puts pressure on quality control and checking, which is why you've got these figures, which are, there's so many of them now that are just literally plagiarized.
I'm going to read something from the announcement, which is that micropublishing typically places new findings directly into information discovery spaces. Now, there's that strange thing, information discovery space, when it used to be called a newspaper or a journal. But so when I was a graduate student, mathematical reviews was a place where I would discover new things. And I sort of spent time looking at the mathematical reviews for the areas I was interested in. And I'm sure that continues, but one can also search Google and all sorts of other things. But this idea of information discovery spaces, I think it's a phrase that works quite well. And I borrowed it from another article. I think it's a nice phrase. And it gets to the heart of what publishing is about. Well, there's the vanity side and it's on your CV side of it. But if you like, those are secondary values. The primary value is that other people are reading it and being influenced it, and they need to discover it. So if you publish something in the Bulletin of the American Mathematical Society, that goes to all members of the American Mathematical Society. And they have high standards. So you know that the articles in it are going to be pretty well written by and large. And there's a sort of process that's going on. And this thing about information discovery spaces seems to be really important. And the digital innovators understand that the digital communities that form with Twitter or YouTube or Discourse or whatever are information discovery spaces. And hosting such a platform actually has financial benefits. LinkedIn gets income out of its ability to harness the job market, for example. So the economics of things are changing a lot because things that used to be expensive are now cheap. So previously, when you published a journal, it involved letters being sent. I remember getting letters from somebody in New York about an article I'd written. Actual physical letters, and I probably still got them. But now I suspect that you can publish an article on a micropublishing site, and except for the peer review and a certain amount of, so to speak, necessary administrative oversight, no human beings are involved. And certainly with the archive, in the normal run of events, there's probably some sort of overview to keep out the people who need to be kept out. But by and large, is an entirely automated process. And that really drives down the cost and changes the nature of things. I'll stop. Nelson, you're muted.
I attempted unsuccessfully to post the URL for this book, but I'll show a picture of it. It's called Making Nature,
Okay.
The History of a Scientific Journal by Melinda Baldwin. I'll make another attempt to get a link to the BibTech entry for the book, but it's a very interesting read and tells a lot about publishing in the 19th century, in the early 20th century.
Posted the link for you.
Beat me to it.
I'm going to say something, which is we've had some interesting talks at TUG conferences, the online ones, and interesting keynotes. I'm all in favor of that. And we have to know what's going on in the broader world in order to properly take our part in it. And excellence in typography no longer opens doors. Excellence in digital typography, web pages, that does open doors. And I think we have to recognize that in some areas, print is an afterthought. And part of that is that even though tech automates typesetting, it's still not an automated process. It's not a reliable automated process.
What do you mean it's not a reliable automated process? Which bit are you saying is not automated?
Page makeup.
Right. Okay. So it needs some manual, yeah, unless it's a very simple, straightforward page.
It requires some human oversight.
The big thing in, yeah, I mean, you're right. Paper is secondary, and a lot of journals are not published at all. But they still require a PDF. People still feel they want a PDF because even digitally they want to. I don't know, on an iPad, people seem to want a PDF. Right, there are very few publications that don't have a PDF. So it's still, you still want to create a nice PDF.
I think that when HTML becomes archival, whatever that means, when it satisfies the usability properties. So, for example, Martin Ruckert's hint system has got elements of archival about it because it's got elements of tech about it. And the lawyers like PDF because it is or can be archival. And lawyers are very important for archival, are very keen on things being archival. The printing of the laws was one of the first commercial applications of Fleet Street, of print, and the law books was one of the big things in publishing, because then the judge and the lawyers on both sides could actually know that they're talking about the same laws. And not only that, but the reporting of cases because of the development of case law. Case law was developed a long time before a precedent was developed, a long time before printing was able to keep up with things. But when print came in, then you started getting legal textbooks on all sorts of areas that aggregated case law.
There's
So
one thing about.
So
forgive me.
PDF has a role, and it deserves that role for particular social reasons. And you have to
Okay.
understand those social reasons if you're going to unpick the domination that PDF has in particular areas. Over to Kaveh.
No, for me, PDF is a thing. Okay, HTML is not a thing. It flows, right? You can change your browser size, etc. There's something about a PDF that I believe human beings are. We like to think of things as things, right? We pick up a pencil, put it down. Now, one area I think that might be a positive for PDF is that because the page doesn't change, you remember things by where they were. You know your keys are on the right-hand side, the back of your drawer, right? If your drawer keeps changing size, you have to look where it is. So I think it might help memory, or maybe it's because we're older and youngsters are different, but maybe there's something in it that you remember. Where did I see that figure? Yeah, it was in the top right of the page. It was the top of the page. It was a double column figure, something like that, where you can go back to it. That if you think about it, that's how you remember things, and it might be easier to remember in a non-flowing, paginated form than a free-flowing form. But
I think what will make a big difference is if you could annotate web pages as easily as you can annotate printed pages. The writing of comments on paper that's already been printed is an enormous benefit. And it relates to what you're saying about place, because you put little post-it notes to indicate pages of interest, bookmarks.
well, you can annotate on the web. There are annotation, quite good annotation software.
But not on web. But I don't think you can annotate an ordinary web page.
You can with the thing called hypothesis. I'll give you so hypothesis allows you to do that, and actually it's a layer on top, and you can share your annotations with others too. Okay. So if you go, I don't use it much, but if you go to a web page and you say, "Oh, this is interesting. I want to remember this this place," you can annotate it. Then that'll keep your annotation. You can then go back to that by clicking that annotation.
Oh, gotcha. So that's another publishing tool, isn't it?
In a sense, yes, correct. It's once you install it, you can simply annotate. I found it not fully user friendly, but basically you highlight a piece of text and you annotate, you write whatever, and then you can share that with a group as well, or with everyone.
They got a news item that says that the Zuckerberg people are funding their partnership, Annotate's partnership with Cold Spring Hardware Laboratory, and
with BioArchive actually, BioArchive, yes.
Yeah,
they got a good big the 6 million grant for that.
Oh, really?
Just
interested.
Quite a lot for what they, what I would have thought, but it's not just for that; it's for other things as well.
To go back to information discovery spaces.
Yeah.
The creation of links is actually really important, I think. That somebody did something and then it gets tweeted and then it gets retweeted. That's creating links. And the making of connections, and that's why persistent URLs are so important, because they allow links to maintain and continue. And that's why digital object identifiers are important. And that, for that matter, is why publishers and books are important, and journals are important, because they allow you to create a link. So you can And way back before that, it was chapter and verse for the Bible. That allows you to reference a particular piece of information. And somebody who's given the link can retrieve that object. And that is one of the things that the post-print era, the era we're in, is really good at, or can be really good at, is sharing links between things. And we're doing that in the chat. We're talking about something, and then it's amazing. I paste something on, I do a small operation on where I am, and each of you gets a copy. And by clicking on that, you can have effectively the same experience as I'm having. So I'm looking at web.hypothesis.is, and any of you can click on that and have essentially the same experience. And that is sharing a resource without having to. It's quite different from saying, I've written down the thing that you want to look at. You can have a look at it now. You no longer need a physical medium in order to communicate information. And
you're absolutely right. Can I give you a little, in case you probably might all know about this, but maybe not. You can have a link to a particular paste, a thing that you highlighted, a particular sentence that you've highlighted.
I've seen it in some context. Yeah.
Yeah, you highlight in Chrome, for example, then you right click and you say copy link to highlight. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
The link I put in here, that should go to that particular piece of text. It sort of does a search for that. Can you see that? It actually highlights the piece of text that I highlighted as well, which is even better.
So we can reference all manner of things.
Yeah.
What's happened is that the people that love computers have been driving this revolution and making tools that help the way they work. So that's things like man pages and compilers and editing tools and software and systems and networks and all manner of stuff. And in some sense, they've made all these tools in response to their needs. And now these tools are leaking out of that digital enclave of the geeks and the men with beards and all that sort of stuff, and going into the broader world. And you can think of Stack Exchange as an example of that. It started as a question and answer computing site, and the social mechanisms, as you described them in your talk, Kaveh, turned out to have some more widespread value, and other communities were using them. And so to speak, new paradigms have arisen. There are rules about, when I say rules, about what you do when you go into a restaurant. There's a sort of, we know how to behave in a restaurant. And there are sort of rules on how you behave in a question and answer sort of forum. And there's a developing understanding of that. And the car required people to understand the rules regarding driving and respecting other people on the road. So a lot is happening, and it's a combination of small things and big things. Kaveh, are you happy about? I'm very pleased you've come and given us this talk.
I'm very pleased too, and thank you for your time, guys. I was a bit nervous, but it went all right.
We were a friendly lot most of the time. Anybody want farewell remarks?
I caught the tail end and it looked interesting. So I was happy to see it.
The summary of Stack Exchange is great. We should be doing scientific publishing that way.
There you go.